Welcome back to the New Zealand Property Insights. I'm Paul Roberts.
And I'm Debbie Roberts. We're the owners of Property Apprentice. And as always, we're here to help you navigate the New Zealand property market with real facts, not just headlines.
Today, we're opening episode 23 with a focus on critical ethics, security, consumer protection structures, and we're starting with an in-depth look at the rise of AI, artificial intelligence, in the real estate marketing, analyzing where the line is drawn between smart presentation and outright deception.
That's right. AI tools are now incredibly common in property photography and listing descriptions. But as these tools become more advanced, they're raising significant legal, ethical, and financing questions. We'll also break down a critical debate unfolding across our own industry as property coaches call for increased regulations to eliminate cowboy operators and boost consumer confidence following some high-profile liquidations.
Plus, we're wrapping up with some key developments on supply and construction side, analyzing the latest Cordell construction cost index data to show why residential build costs are accelerating at their fastest annual pace in almost 3 years.
This episode's designed to give you a clear strategic view of the current cycle, so let's get into the data. Segment 1, the digital illusion, AI in property marketing, ethical concealment, and the behind-the-frame test. So we're kicking off this first segment with a look at how artificial intelligence is quietly reshaping real estate photography in New Zealand. While photo editing's been around for decades, modern AI tools have made it incredibly easy to alter images in ways that can make a property look significantly different from reality.
This has prompted real estate agents and photographers to speak out, warning that each professional's moral compass and regulatory obligations must dictate how the tools are used. So let's lay out the facts. Industry professionals highlight that while extreme examples of AI deception are rare in New Zealand, the rapid adoption of AI image manipulation tools has prompted an industry-wide reminder regarding the rules of marketing. Photographers note that AI is now used to some degree in major real estate media, typically, though, pretty subtle, low-risk adjustments like removing rubbish bins or power cords, clutter. Beyond that simple objection removal, AI is increasingly used for virtual staging and digital sky replacements, with some media firms replacing the sky on every single property shoot and using AI to manipulate daytime shots into a sunset or dusk photo. Despite the need of AI generation, the software licensing and computing costs are high, meaning AI video and image rendering does not necessarily result in cheaper media sort of packages for vendors, with imperfect video prompts costing up to $20 for just 5 seconds of footage.
The real estate authorities issued official guidance emphasizing that while marketing is designed to create interest, all promotional materials and images must represent a true, accurate representation of the property and must not be misleading. New Zealand government's taken a light touch approach to AI regulation, relying on existing consumer protection laws rather than introducing real estate specific AI legislation, which places the burden of governance onto individual agencies. Experts distinguish between low-risk cosmetic adjustments and high-risk misrepresentations, noting that digitally altering permanent features like window views, neighbouring power pylons, unpainted walls, or structural damage crosses the line into illegal deception. Real estate agents are legally bound by code not to mislead customers, withhold key property information, or provide false details, and the Real Estate Authority recommends that all AI-enhanced or virtually staged photos feature a clear written disclosure.
Because online AI checkers and image detectors can be highly inaccurate, the Real Estate Agents Authority strongly advises prospective buyers to personally inspect a property or have a trusted professional to do so before purchasing. So this is quite an interesting evolution, but it really highlights the tension between marketing a property and representing it honestly. Real estate agent Philip Reeve made an excellent distinction here between concealment and visualization. If you're waiting to show how a lounge suite fits into any room, that is visualization. It's a helpful tool for buyers. But if you're using AI to digitally erase a neighboring pylon or structurally cracked walls or damp patches on the wall, that's actually concealment. And it's deception, and it violates the basic legal obligations of that profession.
Absolutely. I mean, that's just dodgy.
Yeah.
So what photographer Leon Thomason mentioned about sky replacements and dusk shots is really revealing. If every single listing's getting a fake sunset because it's easier than waiting for the right light, buyers need to realise that the digital version of the property they see online is heavily stylised. I mean, my thoughts are you've got to be a bit of a numpty if you think that the sky is going to look like that after you've purchased. Do you reckon?
Yeah.
It's fairly easy. Beautiful sunsets don't happen every night. This is why the Real Estate Authority Chief Executive Belinda Moffat is quite right to emphasise the need for careful human oversight and clear disclosure. If an image has been virtually staged or digitally enhanced, it must be clearly labelled so that the buyer knows what they're looking at.
And as a buyer, you cannot rely on AI checkers or reverse image searches because they're frequently wrong. You have to take control of your own due diligence. And as Philip Reeve said, he gave some excellent advice on this. So when you're talking to the listing agent, don't just ask the usual questions about school zones or the building age, or is there anything you need to tell me? Ask them directly, are the online photos an accurate representation of the property as it sits today? And is there anything we need to know beyond that?
That beyond the frame question's a brilliant tip. It forces the agent to disclose anything that might have been strategically cropped or edited out. And ultimately, this digital shift reinforces why physical inspection and professional property checks are completely non-negotiable. You shouldn't ever buy a property based on a polished online gallery. You need to walk the boundary, check the outbuildings, run a proper due diligence process to ensure what you're buying matches the digital promise. I mean, real estate agents have always been very careful with the photos that they choose to promote a property. So, it's one thing turning your back on a corner that's backed up with rubbish compared to using digital, digital, what's the word?
Enhancement.
That's the word. Yeah. It's completely different looking at digital enhancement to remove some deteriorated building materials as part of that process. That's where the line, I think, is completely crossed in some situations.
All right, segment 2, the cowboy coaching squeeze, liquidation realities, FMA boundaries, and the professional integrity standard. So for our second topic today, we're addressing a major discussion taking place within the property coaching sector. Several industry professionals and coaches are calling for more regulatory or accreditation framework to eliminate cowboy operators and restore consumer confidence. I actually think there's probably less coaches asking for that. I think it's more there's people getting caught out, and I think this is something that the FMA and the Commerce Commission need to look into.
Absolutely. It was interesting when I got called to make comments myself in that article that was written, but this discussion was intensified following recent reports that companies run by prominent social media influencer and property coach Ashley Dean-Binnie have entered liquidation, owing more than $2 million to creditors. So let's have a look at some of the facts. There are several property coaches and industry figures that are calling for formal regulation or at least an accreditation system. But as Paul said, there's far more out there that literally wouldn't be able to become financial advisors because they've previously been bankrupt or they've got some sort of legal blemish, which should be a bit of a warning. Like my feedback to the reporter, the journalist that interviewed me, I said that I think anyone who's giving advice about purchasing a property should fall under the Financial Markets Authority, as a financial advisor qualified with the investment strand. But former clients of that failed coach, Ashley Dean-Binnie, claimed significant financial losses, and they allege substandard renovation work on property flips and coaching courses that failed to deliver promised systems. As a result of the liquidations, Binnie faces a potential ban on starting new companies or operating recently established entities.
And good thing too. I think experienced educators argue that future accreditation system would require property coaches to provide verified case studies, client records, providing repeated success over different cycles. But if they're dealing with you financially and they're dealing with, hey, this is what you should buy, these are the types of property, and talking about your ability with funding and what you should do with your money, they need to be licensed with the FMA.
And part of the issue there is that the rules around that aren't even clear.
Hmm.
You know, the FMA, when the regulations changed in the industry, we called the FMA personally and said to them, you know, as property coaches, because this was before all of these new regulations came in, we said, as property coaches, should we be registered financial advisors? That was the first step. And the response that we got from the FMA was, oh, I'm not sure. You know, property coaching falls into quite a grey area. It all boils down to whether you give financial advice. And we thought, well, you know, rather than playing on the boundaries, let's just go ahead and become regulated. So we did.
Yeah. And I think there's also a lot of companies who are regulated financial advisors and they're licensed, but they sell new build. And, you know, there's a conflict of interest there, regardless of whether or not it's a different company that they also happen to own. I just don't agree with it. Yeah. But industry experts suggested a self-regulated code of ethics would include strict rules preventing coaches from lending money or borrowing money from clients, which you should never do anyway, alongside mandatory conflict of interest disclosures, which is absolutely required.
And any financial advisor has to disclose any conflict of interest under the current regulation, as well as just if someone isn't a regulated financial advisor, you do not have those protections in place. So under current Financial Market Authority rules, property coaches who restrict services to generalised education materials and strategic advice don't require a financial advisor license.
But that doesn't really mean that they're not giving advice.
Doesn't protect the consumer.
Doesn't protect you, the consumer. The Financial Markets Authority warns that if a property coach recommends a specific property, mortgage brokers, financial products tailored to an individual's personal financial situation, they are likely giving regulated financial advice and must be licensed. And this is exactly what we're saying. People need to be licensed if they're giving that kind of advice, and they all are. So while raw real estate itself is not a regulated financial product, advice that crosses into residential lending, Kiwi Saver, first home withdrawals, home insurance products, triggers licensing obligations under the FMA. The Real Estate Agents Authority spokesperson confirms that whether a coaching business meets the definition of real estate agency works depend on the specific activity, stepping in if services are intending to bring out a specific transaction.
Absolutely. And don't forget that if you're dealing with a licensed real estate salesperson, then you do have a course for making complaints if there's an issue that arises. And likewise, if you're working with a financial advisor, you know, someone who's qualified as a financial advisor or working underneath the FAT, there is a process for making complaints. If you're working with someone, a property coach who's completely unregulated.
Just on Facebook?
Yeah. You've got nowhere to go if they do something that's dodgy other than taking them through the legal process, which can be quite expensive. And so the Ministry of Justice indicates that there's currently no plan to introduce coach-specific legislation, pointing to existing consumer protection laws, the FMA and the REA, as adequate frameworks. But like I said, that consumer protection law can be an interesting one, to say the least. The New Zealand Law Society recommends that consumers conduct strict due diligence before hiring a property coach, confirming how they're compensated, checking for conflicts of interest, and ensuring legal and tax advice is obtained from independent qualified professionals. And I couldn't agree more. I think if you do a quick Google search on most of them, your hair will turn grey. So just be careful.
So this is an incredibly important discussion for our industry, the liquidation of Ashley Dean-Binnie's companies, leaving clients out of pocket by over $2 million and dealing with substandard flip renovations. You think about those people that have bought those properties. That highlights exactly why we need to separate the true professionals from the hype professionals, the social media giants. When someone flips a single house and then they call themselves an influencer and start charging thousands of dollars for coaching, it damages their reputation. Educators and advisors who have spent decades building real portfolios and helping their clients.
Absolutely. And to be completely blunt, I don't know how some of these business owners sleep at night. I really don't. Like, especially the really dodgy ones that set up the ownership structure. So like they've got no risk in the deal. They just split the profit, so the customers are the ones that take all of the risk and only get half the profit for that. And as we've seen with this particular case that was outlined, that has left a lot of people with hundreds of thousands of dollars out of pocket and still owning a lemon of a property. So yeah, you've got to be careful. We've seen people bankrupt themselves, reinvent their brands 2 or 3 times and just keep selling the same dream to unsuspecting Kiwis. This is exactly why we chose to go down that path of being financial advice providers and why we set up Property Apprentice to begin with. We wanted to create a company that we wish had been around when we started learning how to invest, because we spent a small fortune educating ourselves and learning lessons the hard way. So a lot of the people coaching out there at the moment, as I said earlier, they wouldn't qualify to be financial advisors because of past bankruptcies or legal issues, and that would instantly weed them out.
So that's a really good point. If you're pointing at a client-specific property deal or a specific mortgage or on selling a deal that you sourced, or you've got a network of people and, hey, who wants this deal I found? You're crossing a clear regulatory line. That is real estate agency work and or financial advice. You must be licensed under the FMA or the REA to do it, depending on which way you're doing it. It protects the consumer and ensures there's a proper formal complaints process, a disputes resolution scheme, rather than people just having to complain on Facebook groups or some Reddit or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, a lot of these people would really struggle to get new clients if people just did some pretty simple Google searches before they paid tens of thousands of dollars to get really limited support, if any. And, there is that cynical side to this as well. When the property market softens and flipping houses becomes harder, we always see a surge of flippers turning into property coaches because maybe they're not making as much money as they previously had from selling renovated properties. So consumers, do your due diligence. As Christine King from the Law Society recommends, you've got to ask how your coach is being paid, check their actual track record of repeated success across different market cycles, and always get independent legal and tax advice from qualified professionals before signing anything. Anyone who's putting pressure on you to make a decision to become a client of theirs, ask yourself,
do I need to do that today?
do I need that hard
Do I need to
sell?
buy that house by the end of the week? No, you don't.
Absolutely. So never rely on a coach's in-house team. If you can keep your advice completely independent, then that really helps protect your interests as well.
For our final segment today, let's look at the actual cost of building a home in New Zealand. The latest Cordell Construction Cost Index reveals that residential construction costs rose by 1.1% in the June quarter, pushing the annual rate of growth up 3.5%. This represents the fastest annual acceleration we've seen in almost 3 years.
While a 1.1% quarterly increase sits close to the long-term historical average, seeing the annual index rise for 3 consecutive quarters signals a clear end to the flat, subdued cost environment we experienced recently, potentially in large part due to the conflict between US and Iran, increasing fuel costs and things like that. So, let's lay out some of the facts. Residential construction costs in New Zealand grew by 1.1% over the June quarter, bringing their annual cost growth rate to 3.5%. This annual acceleration represents the fastest pace of growth in almost 3 years, indicating an end to the flat building cost environment of recent years. That shift in build costs reflects a construction sector coming back to life, with nationwide dwelling consents climbing from below 34,000 last year to more than 39,000. As I said earlier, international shipping and transport costs have been pushed up due to rising oil prices linked directly to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East.
Building suppliers have flagged widespread price increases across key structural materials, specifically affecting structural steel, plumbing components, insulation, aluminium roofing accessories. Due to a highly competitive building market and flat to subdued existing house prices, builders have limited room but to pass on the higher material costs directly to the customers, forcing many to absorb the pressure through tighter business margins. Economists suggest that moderating inflation and supportive mortgage rates should help sustain a gradual residential building recovery through the second half of the year. Also, I note that today the Reserve Bank has kept the loan to value ratios the same. So at least that's a good bit of news at the moment. Current cost growth rates remain significantly lower than extreme pandemic era cost spikes recorded in 2021, 2022, indicating the return to healthy building volumes rather than a chaotic supply shock. So under the current lending rules, both loan to value ratios, debt to income ratios, restrictions feature official exemptions for new build finance, allowing prospective buyers to bypass standard lending caps.
And I think something else that hasn't been mentioned yet is the fact that local councils have increased their costs significantly. So, rates are all increasing, which is also adding to the cost of buying new builds and owning property in general. So certainly developer contributions in a number of areas across the country have had some significant increases, and that's not going to help keep house prices down.
Yeah.
The June Cordell Index from Calvin Davidson's a vital reality check for anyone planning a build, pushing back up to a 3.5% annual cost growth rate, tells us that the window of flat, stagnant build prices has officially closed. The sector's waking up with consents climbing from 34,000 up to 39,000. But what stands out here is Davidson's point about builder margins. Because existing house prices are flat, builders can't easily raise their contract prices without pricing themselves out of the market. So a lot of them are actively absorbing as much of those extra costs themselves.
And that's a significant risk. If builders are already operating razor-thin margins, which they do, and absorbing hikes in steel, plumbing, roofing, the risk of company liquidations does remain elevated. As a buyer or investor, you must perform extreme due diligence on your building partner before signing a fixed price contract. Ensure they're financially stable, have a proven track record. Don't just go for the cheapest quote.
Absolutely. And we also have to highlight that excellent silver lining regarding new build finance. The fact that new builds carry full exemptions from both the LVR and the relatively newly introduced DTI restrictions, that can be a powerful strategic tool as long as the new build is actually, in fitting with your current financial position. Because for a lot of people, it makes much better financial sense to purchase existing rather than new builds.
The key is always to sit down with an independent advisor, run the build feasibility maths with a realistic buffer for that 3.5% cost growth, and make sure your cash flows are fully secured before breaking ground.
There's actually even some developers that are guaranteeing the price of the build for the duration of the contract, which is awesome.
Yeah,
that's really helpful.
Yeah. So fixed price, and of course, having a developer that is well known around New Zealand is always going to be, a much better let you sleep at night.
Absolutely. So that wraps up episode 23 of New Zealand Property Insights. We'd analysed the rise of AI in real estate marketing, the critical line between visualisation and deception, the high stakes debate surrounding property coaching regulations, and the accelerating costs of building a home.
If you're looking at these long-term structural, ethical and licensing changes has made you realize that you need personalized financial plan or want to understand how to build your own portfolio, the buying rules in a changing market, our team's ready to assist you.
We invite you to join me at one of our free online events called How to Succeed with Property Investing. It's a highly practical, data-backed session designed to show you how to establish buying boundaries, maximize borrowing capacity, and evaluate changing regional demands. And we do a bit of a market update in those sessions as well.
But as Debbie said, it's directly with her, so there's no sales pressure, no obligation. We don't sell property, so 100% independent, focused entirely on your growth and your success. So you can find the link to register directly below the show notes, or simply visit propertyapprentice.co.nz and come along to one of our free events.
And I know a lot of our clients listen to these podcasts as well. So if you know someone else who you think would benefit from our help, feel free to refer them to one of our free events as well. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you shortly. See you in the next episode. Hey there. Want to stay on top of the latest property news and trends? Subscribe to the Property Apprentice podcast for weekly updates that will help you to navigate the market like a pro. We cover everything from insider tips to expert interviews, so you'll always be in the know. And don't forget to ring the bell and hit that subscribe button here on our YouTube channel for even more helpful content to boost your property journey. Check out the link in the description to subscribe to the podcast, and we'll see you in the next episode. Happy investing.